welcome everybody to Amtgard Leadership University. For this panel today, we're going to be talking about communication, and hopefully we'll dive a little bit into conflict management. We're coming to you from the Gathering of the Clans in 2017. And what we're going to ask to knock out introductions, starting from my left and moving to the right, just tell us a little bit about yourself, where do you play, and then any of the key topics or footstops that you want to make sure we discuss today. Starting with the show.
All right. I'm Archduke Ormar Svensson. I hail from the Empire of the Iron Mountains. I've been playing for about 6 years now, and I've been Monarch and other various Imperial level officers several times. One thing I definitely want to make sure we talk about is understanding that communication as a whole, you're going to have conflict, and that the entire interaction is transactional. So you need to understand that whenever you're communicating, you're going to get reactions, and you need to be able to react to them.
I'm Medryn. I guess that's actually Archduke Medryn Harlequin. I'm from the Iron Mountains as well. In real life, I am an attorney and a trained mediator. What that means is I deal with conflict on a regular basis. And what I want to talk about is essentially the fact that conflict is almost always inevitable in communication. It just happens. People have different opinions. People have different goals. And so it's not something that necessarily has to be scary or something that you need to be worried about, but it is something that you should have some concept of how to deal with on a regular basis. The other big thing I want to talk about is communication isn't just talking. Communication is also listening, and listening well.
Hi, I'm Lalitana, or Lali for short. I'm relatively new to Amtgard, although I started coming to events about 5-6 months ago from Pooh Bear, who is not new to this. She's been doing this 30 years. And in my mundane life, I'm a psychologist who works at a hospital, and I also teach prevention and management of disruptive behavior, and as well as motivational interviewing. And you know, there are ways of communicating with people that are more effective than others, and it's important to recognize increasing levels of stress in those communications and how they affect people.
I'm Keladry. I come from Golden Vale. I've been playing almost 9 years now, and I'm also a member of the Amtgard Ombudsman program, so hopefully I can kind of offer the perspective of what a mediator can do for you as a member of Amtgard who is going to deal with conflict at some point.
And we're doing titles. Grand Duchess Azrael-Jade from Dragonspine. And to repeat what some other people said, conflict is inevitable. We're going to have conflict in everything we do, in our conversations at the park. And communication is really the big thing I want to talk about. A lot of communication is not your verbals, it's your nonverbals, it's your body language, it's the way you hold yourself. So when you're sending online communications, that other part of the communication doesn't exist. So I'm hoping that we talk a little bit about online communication.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. As a reminder, I would just ask you to consider the fact that while I'm sitting up close to you, and so is the recording equipment, but we're actually talking to people in the audience in the room going all the way back to that far corner of Quinnoff and Chalet in the very back there. So please be loud and proud so that everybody in the room can hear you. Also, just in case, yeah, we'll be good to go. I think the rain may be avoiding us today. So, you know what, Lolly, I'm going to throw the first question towards you. What's communication?
It's how people share information with each other. And again, people often communicate more than they intend to, and that's important to be aware of. So sometimes you may have a message that you really want the other person to perceive, but other times you may be communicating emotions or other kinds of information that you might not even be aware of.
So, Medryn, do you mind trying to read her mind a little bit? What are some of the things you can do, I guess, accidentally? What's the unintended messages you can send?
Well, if we're talking about in-person communication, as Azrael said, there's lots of nonverbal cues that get communicated in the way that you sit, the way that you stand, the way that you move your body. Tone carries a lot of information for human beings, just whether you're speaking angrily or passionately or loudly or quietly. All of those things can influence how your message is received and whether people are willing to listen to you. Your language that you choose to use can also influence how you communicate, whether you're speaking at a higher level, more in a, I guess, pedantic way, or whether you're speaking like you would to a child, whether you're being somewhat condescending in the language you use. All of those things carry messages beyond what you're simply saying.
So how can I make sure that my communication, while we talked about how it's an interaction between two people, sticking with you, Medryn, real quick. So how can I keep that communication constructive?
So when you are communicating with someone, you have some goal. And whether that goal is to advocate for a position, whether that goal is to communicate educational information, to inform, you need to be aware of what you're trying to do and keep that goal in mind. And I guess continue to make sure that every message that you're sending is working towards the goal that you were trying to achieve.
Azrael-Jade, is there a way to, other than having the person repeat back to me, right? Just verbatim parrot, is there a way that I can make sure that maybe I'm being received as I intended? There's some things I can.
One of the things I will do in conversations is I will say what I need to say, and then I will say, okay, so do you understand that we're going to do X? And then I pause for the yes. And then, okay, and we're also going to do Y. And then I pause for the yes. And then I say, all right, when I get to Y, like, wait, I'm doing Y too? What about Y do I need to do? So you say what you're going to say, and then you don't, instead of parroting it back, you kind of take now, okay, do you understand each step of this process that we need to do? And that could be from anything from, we're going to plan a feast, and we're going to decide who's going to do what part of the feast. And you're at a meeting, and then we're done to say, okay, Goldcrest, you're going to get the potatoes, right? Yes. Okay. Over here, Cord, you're going to get the drinks? Yes. Okay. So we just kind of make sure that everybody is on the same page and nobody's miscued on who's going to do what.
There's a lot of questions coming in about dealing with conflict management. Trying to get focused more just on the communication piece. So we agree. So it's an interaction. We're sharing a message right between a sender and a receiver. We've got a couple different tips for following on how to make sure that at least the message was intended and what the correct time is. What are some other things we need to consider about this is open forum as we start to just set the context for communication as we start going towards a conflict? What are some things we need to be talking about?
So one of the things that is really important when you are communicating with someone is to try to use a skill called active listening. And so what active listening is you, when someone says something to you, you acknowledge what they have said and your understanding of it. So you can say, for example, what I hear you saying to me is X. Is that correct? And that allows the other person to clarify, make certain that they are getting their message across. So that's kind of what I said at the very beginning, that communication is not just about speaking, it's about listening. It's about making sure that you understand what the other person is saying. As we head towards the conflict management situation, a lot of times conflict is born out of not really understanding what the other person is saying and talking past one another. And that certainly leads to an escalation of conflict.
When you're communicating with individuals, every single one of us come from a different background, whether it be from, your different parts of the country, how you speak is different. During my time in service, I was trained as a linguist, and one of the things we were taught was to understand that what you are trying to say, your intent in what you're saying, may not be what the other individual is interpreting. So try to put yourself a little bit, it's being an active listener, trying to understand, what they're saying back to you, but also at the same time, kind of putting yourself in their shoes a little bit to see what's the best way that I can convey this message to that individual to make sure that what message I intend to send is actually being interpreted properly. And a lot of that is getting that feedback of, did you understand what I said? Sometimes it's, hey, read it back to me, say it back to me, so that way I can understand that you kind of got the message I was trying to say. So understanding and kind of establish what your expectations are with that communication and make sure you accomplish those too. Because just because you said it doesn't mean it was understood.
So we talked about mannerisms.
Oh, sorry, just building off that really quickly, especially when we're talking about internet communication, I think we discussed this a little bit earlier. Word choice can be really, really important. So a lot of times you have a conversation on the internet and all of a sudden the message you intended to put out is not what people are reading. And it's really easy to get excited and to type quickly or to talk quickly in person. And it's easy to use words that don't mean what you want to mean. And then suddenly you don't understand why your message isn't getting across. And I think being precise with the words you use, especially when you have time to proofread a sentence before you hit post, is really important.
And also part of, effective communication, assertiveness, whatever you want to call it, is trying to acknowledge where the other person is coming from, and as well as where you're coming from. When you suspect two people are have sort of at cross purposes, well, I understand that you want to do it this way, or I could see how, based on last time, you might, have some real strong opinions about that. At the same time, I feel like it needs to be done this way because of da-da-da. Notice I said and instead of but. When you say but, you're talking about preciseness in language. But negates everything that came before it. So when you're trying to acknowledge two things, saying I acknowledge da-da-da and I acknowledge da-da-da can help. Also, a lot of people have hit on this, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, or trying to see things from the other person's perspective is really important. That's probably something that gets missed a lot in online communication in particular. There's a really good video, I think it's Brene Brown, the difference between empathy versus sympathy. Sympathy is more like, oh, poor thing, but empathy is actually, she does this little cartoon where there's like these little creatures and one's stuck in a hole and the other one's like, oh, that's terrible. Oh, but then somebody else actually gets down in the hole with the person and says, okay, now we're going through this together. So being kind of joining with somebody as opposed to either looking down on them or trying to fight them, can go a long way.
So we talked about a best practice to kind of make sure that the receiver at least understood the intended message. Are there any other best practices that maybe you could do in a conversation to make sure that you're both at least understanding the intended dialogue? Any other thoughts other than the summary, kind of more the verification?
I think Medryn's point about active listening is really important. If you go into a conversation knowing that you are right and the other person is wrong, and nothing in the world is going to convince you otherwise, you're not really communicating. You're just dictating at somebody. And it's going to be really hard for you to get anywhere with that.
So we also talked about mannerisms and things like that. So are there any mannerisms I could pick up on and say, like, wow, this person is not active listening? Anything come to mind?
Well, there's things like if somebody is sitting with, closed, crossed arms and legs, the person might be cold.
All of us are sitting like this.
Yeah,
well,
we're all hunched over.
But another thing that we're all doing is we're leaning forward. So leaning forward shows I'm paying attention. Making eye contact in a lot of cultures is seen as paying attention, a sign of respect. There are a few cultures where direct eye contact is seen as disrespectful. And of course, you stare somebody down. Respecting personal space, because what happens when somebody is, as the stress levels are increasing, the person needs a bigger bubble and feels more easily threatened with, as people come into that bubble. And, the focus, the perception narrows as somebody's more stressed. So, right now I'm calm, even though I'm on like camera and stuff. And, I'm aware, I can be aware of what's going on in different parts of the room. But if I was suddenly panicked or felt threatened, I'd just be focused on what I was perceiving to be the threat. So that's important to acknowledge too.
One of the other things would be follow up.
Oh yeah.
Like after the meeting, especially if you're meeting on something, to follow up with your people that you've talked to. If it's not like, if you're not doing conflict resolution, if you're doing something, again, and I'll use the planning example, follow up with your people in the next couple of days. Hey, how's everything going? And kind of be the person that say, hey, how's everything going? Have you found us? How's your search for the peace towel going? So that it's already out there what you're looking for them to bring back to you. So if they like totally miscued on everything and then they're like, oh, I was supposed to get the feast hall. It's kind of a polite way for them to save face, but also make sure that they know what they need to do. So following up with the conversations, I think, is also important.
But again, it's not like you weren't so much, where are you at on it? So much
Like,
it's the broader.
hey, how's everything going? How's your search going with this? Or hey, have you found out which store has the potatoes on sale? How's that going? As opposed to where are you at with getting this done for me? It's kind of just more of a conversational inquiry.
This is ironic, given what I just did. One of the ways that you can tell that someone is not active listening is if they're interrupting on a regular basis. Another thing that you will notice is if they respond very rapidly. So a lot of times what happens when we're in a kind of intense communication or even some level of conflict, we stop listening to what the person is actually saying, and we are listening for the purpose of responding. So we're not listening to understand what they've said. We're listening to forming our own argument in our head as they're speaking. Mm-hmm. And so what you will notice when that happens is that someone responds like the words, one person stops talking and the other person comes right back very quickly. We take time to process. And that's, again, another part of active listening is being kind of calm, pausing, and trying to make sure that you are actually hearing what the person says.
Which I think we can see, and I want to keep the online discussion kind of separate, just talking body movements and stuff like that. But you can see that online fast, right? You look away for a moment, you come back, and there's like 30 comments on one thing, and two people just blasting each other on the keyboard. So, okay, any other thoughts on that? So now we're communicating. There may or may not be some conflict. Stress levels are going up. Our bubbles are expanding a little bit on where kind of our comfort area, right, where we need some space, but we're also getting narrow in our focus. But anything else as we're kind of stage setting, I guess, for this panel?
Sorry.
I apologize. Since we are stage setting, communication and kind of what we're moving towards with conflict in general. Conflict, you're going to get heated up. You're going to get more passionate about what you're talking about. And kind of what we were talking about, you're going to start getting a little bit more narrowed in on what you're discussing. About the worst thing you could possibly do is start personal attacks. Mm-hmm. and making it not about the discussion anymore and about other things to try to win your argument. Those are, if I could foot stop anything, don't do that. It completely disrails the entire conversation. It's no longer a very good conversation at that point, and nobody really wants to be invested in name calling or anything like that. That's not fun for anybody involved. So when you're communicating, try to avoid that. Just don't even go down that alley at all. If somebody says it to you, just kind of ignore it and be like, hey, can we get back to the discussion? Like, I'd like to talk to you about this thing, whether it's online or in person.
Kind of the theme I'm hearing from the panel is joining, collaboration, partnering rather than starting out adversarial. Trying to find what the other person or people's perspective is, offering some assistance, having empathy, that goes a long way. Trying to see what you notice from the other person's body language and maybe how that person, what that person brings into the conversation or the room, and then testing these hypotheses in a non-adversarial way. Like you said, the active listening, paraphrasing both the content and maybe some of the maybe the perspective or nonverbals. From what you're saying last time, da-da-da-da happens, and it seems like you don't want that to happen again. And in fact, it makes you kind of uncomfortable to think about that. Is that accurate? And oh yeah, sure, yeah, I definitely don't want that to happen again. So a lot of times people really welcome when you're making an active effort to see where they're coming from.
Sure. Kind of try to resolve the miscommunication as opposed to the next block in conversation. Okay, what about when it does escalate?
Yeah.
We talked a little bit, some things that can lead to the escalation was the or lack of active listening and participating, right? Definitely making some assumptions or having their own story they want to tell. What are some mannerisms? Again, we're talking face-to-face interactions or Azrael-Jade, what are some telltale signs that things have gone hostile or beyond cooperation?
Well, I think there's some pretty obvious, if somebody's body language becomes very rigid, maybe their speech is a little stuttery. Some people will actually literally get red in the face. Some people, you might see tears and they're not the tears of, ho, I'm sorry. They're the tears of, I want to murder you. So those are things you need to look for, maybe like clenching not like an aggressively clenching your fist, but kind of like, releasing and clenching your hands. Stepping into personal space if you're actually standing and talking to somebody, but those are all pretty obvious things. Little less obvious things you might look is just like some light twitches of the body, or like some slight tensing of things, or just the way in which they're responding. If you're having a conversation at 1 decibel and their decibels increasing or getting more curt and like choppy, just things like that are things you should be looking for.
Well, and when you think about what we call the fight, flight, or freeze response, like a cat that's being cornered, the muscles tense up. That's why you see the tightness or the jerkiness. The breathing goes up. The respiration level increases and becomes more rapid and shallow. The heart starts to pound. There may be, sweating. A cat's hair stands up. And this is maybe, if you notice this in yourself in these moments, we don't have enough hair for that, at least most of us, so we might just get goosebumps. But it's the same kind of thing. And all of those things are, and circulation shifts more towards, the central organs away from the extremities. So somebody in that state might be in more of a fight mode, more adversarial, challenging, getting in somebody's personal space. The person might want to escape and run away, or the person might just freeze and not say much. Those are all kind of danger signs, but it's actually the person who feels trapped or cornered. That's probably when the stress levels are highest. And it's amazing. The body starts releasing, stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline, stuff like that. Adrenaline is amazing. It gives you, in terms of large muscle movements, it can give you lots of strength. It's in some of the jobs I've had, I've seen some scary examples of that. Fine motor movements, not so much. So again, and vocabulary might not be as sharp as it usually is. So that's important. And again, when somebody's acting aggressively, our first thought may be, this is a troublemaker. This person may want to, wants to start something, but maybe that person has a lot of baggage and feels triggered because of something that happened in the past, or it might be more of a cornered animal kind of thing.
So if I start seeing that, maybe I'm trying to be the one to communicate. Maybe I'm stuck in the conflict, or I'm witnessing it between two others. Medryn, what are some things I can do to try and de-escalate it? You can pick the perspective that works best.
There are a few things that you can do to de-escalate. And they're varied. One is leave, right? If conflict has gotten to the point that you're really uncomfortable, you can pause, you can stop, you can say, you know what, I can't talk about this right now, or I'm not willing to continue this conversation. If you are willing to continue to engage, there are a lot of things that you can do. If you take if someone is getting agitated and upset, you can take a less threatening body posture. So if you're, I'm not a big guy, but I'm relatively tall. And if I kind of lean forward and loom at someone, that's far more aggressive than if I kind of sit back and, even increase space between the person. The tone of voice that you're using, if you shift the tone from being argumentative or, even discussing to more of a measured tone, that can help as well. Anything that you can do to make yourself less threatening is one way to de-escalate. Now, you also have to know the person that you're interacting with to really be able to tell what's going on. So for example, Cord and Grix are sitting over there, and just about any time we get into a discussion, we yell at each other a lot, loudly and with swear words. And there are people who are like, oh my gosh, those three guys are really angry at each other. We're not. We like each other. We're really good friends. We just happen to yell. That's the communication style that we do when we're together. It works for us, but it doesn't work in every situation. And you can think about it from really broad examples. The way I talk with them is very different than the way I talk with my 4-year-old daughter, right? And just because if I talked to her the way that I talk to them, she would be terrified. You have to be aware of what you're communicating and be really aware of the message that you're sending if you want to be able to de-escalate.
Sorry, just to bounce off that real quick, I think it's important to also know when you're too upset to continue having a conversation. So if someone is starting to get upset with you, the response is often to match where they are. And I think everyone kind of knows their own signs of when they're too upset to really continue a conversation. Like you were talking about, I'm one of those crying people, so I get weepy, my hands start shaking. It's like it's not a fun time. And when you reach a point where you're shaking and ready to scream at someone, that's not the time to continue to try to have your conversation. And you need to recognize that in yourself and be able to say, I can't do this right now. We need to do this a different time. You need to talk to someone else. Maybe we need to take 20 and try this again later. But if you're too upset, you can't de-escalate a situation.
Let's talk online real quick.
Okay.
So we talked a lot about manners, right? And I think Azrael-Jade, you pointed out that we talked a lot about communicating face to face. So Keladry, how do I de-escalate online? Because I'm right. And you need to know.
I think what I said about taking a break still stands. So I get really angry online because you can't see people's faces. So they're just a paragraph of text that is wrong, and they need to know why they're wrong. So there are times where you need to just say no, and you close your browser and you go do something else for an hour and a half, and maybe there are 300 comments when you come back, but that's better than you making there be 600 comments that are all just screaming about somebody's mother. It's not helpful. It's not productive.
And
go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
That makes me think too, especially with smartphones and apps and everything, in addition to, closing your browser, maybe putting your phone somewhere else or putting it on quiet, because there's a temptation every time you get a ping or a sound or a notification, what if this is something important, and you open up your phone and look at it and, oh crap, they said this, so it's, the pause has to be pretty.
There definitely have been times where I've deleted Facebook off my phone. I've deleted the Messenger. I know. I put it back because I'm an addict, but that's, for an hour, it means I have to consciously make the decision to put it back on my phone and look at things. And then, a lot of the same communication tools still apply to online. If you're yelling at someone, it's not going to be helpful. If restating people's points is still going to be helpful, let me try to understand what you're thinking. Is XYZ thing what you think is happening? Is ABC thing your problem with this? Can you help me understand where you're coming from so that I can try to understand why we can't possibly see eye to eye on this? And then there's also just deciding how important it is. So if it's something that is directly going to impact your life, maybe it's really important. If it's a friend of a friend's Facebook post, maybe it's not, and maybe you just unfollow it and you don't ever go back there, and it's not worth it, and that's fine too. You don't have to engage with all of the world's mistakes all the time.
Pick your battles.
Much as you want to, yeah.
Yeah.
Pick less battles than that. No, less battles than that.
Pick the battles you're going to fight.
So, Azrael-Jade, what about when you can't? As an Amtgard leader, a leader in general, you see something that, okay, it's not going to diffuse itself.
I think the first thing you need to do is make sure that that's actually what you're seeing in front of you. Is this a discussion that is actually something that requires my intervention? Or is this, again, we're arguing over which is better, cats or dogs? Because my role as the Amtgard monarch does not need to have an opinion on which is better, cats or dogs. Obviously dogs, but it doesn't matter. So you need to look at the situation and review it and make sure it actually does need you to stir the pot. Because if not, you're just adding 600 posts to an already long post. But if you are in a leadership role and you do see something that absolutely needs to be addressed from a point of view, from a leadership point of view, then I write what I need to say, and there's 800 comments coming, but I don't write it in Facebook. I usually get out Word, and I write it in Word first, and I review it. And what I first do is I write my mad post. I use the F-bombs. I use all the words that I am not allowed to use it on the Monarch. And I just get it all out because then you've typed it and you've got it out of your system. Mm-hmm. And then I take that and then I go underneath it and I was like, okay, what did you say up here that was constructive? And then I formulate what needs to be said. And then I usually send it to somebody that I trust to make sure that I'm still not sounding like a raving lunatic. And say, can you make sure that this sounds clear, concise, professional, and not angry? Unless I need to be angry. Sometimes you need to make sure that people know that you're not happy with what they're saying. And so I have somebody edit, and then I come back and I write 1,000 posts, and then I put up what needs to be said. But I don't just Facebook is horrible. I mean, it's great and it's horrible at the same time because you want to be the person that gets in there and something be said. But when you're the leader, you have to kind of sometimes and set an example. Not only what you're saying, but the tone you're saying it and what you're saying. Just kind of be the adult. Sometimes we have to adult.
It's good to have a mad friend, too. A person that you can just be mad to. Yes. And don't look at Promethea. I know. We all know who my mad friend is. But it's because you're a person. You're still a person, and you need to have a person that you can just yell about things to, and then you write your nice post.
and that is really true. I have a group chat that has a few of my close friends in it. And when something on the internet makes me angry, the first place I go is to that group chat. And I'm like, oh my God, have you seen what that jerk is saying on that post? And then they say, where? Let me go see the post.
What's going on?
Right?
What have I missed?
I mean, sometimes I feel like I'm calling in backup, right? I'm like, hey guys, there's somebody wrong on the internet. I need you to fix it. That's and my wife joked. I think there's an XKCD cartoon about I can't sleep. There's someone wrong on the internet, and my wife can tell when there's someone wrong on the internet because I have my phone and I'm tapping as fast as I possibly can. So make sure you know your job. Make sure you know your role. I have a bunch of different roles in online. In online forums. I'm the Amtgard Rules Representative Organizer, which means I'm theoretically in charge of the rules clarification Facebook group. Mostly I don't do a whole lot of the work. I have my mods do that. But I can't go into that place on Facebook and yell at someone. It's completely inappropriate. That is not my job. That is not my role. I'm not even really an advocate in that place. I can say, okay, guys, based on what you've said, here's the answer. I can answer the question. I can make a ruling, but that's not my place to yell at people. And I would suggest that if you are a monarch or a park leader or anyone in a position of leadership and authority, you shouldn't be yelling at people in that space. That's not your role. Now, I guess sometimes anger is useful, and sometimes communicating to people how absolutely inappropriate their behavior is essential. But you can do that in a constructive way. You can be angry and you can turn that anger into passion for essentially the right reasons and the right things.
Kind of I'm hearing a lot of try not to feed into power struggles. And I'm also hearing a lot of, anger is a signal. Our emotions are signals. Emotions communicate something to us about how we're feeling. And I think we feel anger when we feel like a limit has been stepped over, a boundary has been stepped over. So I think, while we don't want to, send our first angry F-bomb response out, or we don't want to necessarily engage right then, it is helpful to say, okay, what is this about? What's got me so, worked up about this? And a lot of times it is because a limit needs to be set. And again, that can inform how you handle it and say, this isn't okay. What happened needs to stop right this minute. And setting limits, it's important to be clear. Again, people can't take in a lot of words when they're that worked up. You still are not trying to feed into the power struggle and, oh yeah, well, let me tell you, but it's sort of like, I need you to da-da-da-da-da. So I need you, if it's in person, I need you to sit down and lower your voice. Otherwise, I can't help resolve this for you. And then hopefully that will bring that tension level down. That's the limit setting and verbal de-escalation. Sometimes that still doesn't work, but a lot of times it does, and that's how this pause can come in handy. So you can sort of translate from, oh my gosh, can't believe that happened, someone's wrong, and then to, okay, here's what needs to happen.
And so something kind of bouncing off of that, talking about identifying why you're angry, identifying what you're upset about. A lot of conflict comes because people are very zero-sum oriented. Mm-hmm. If you're winning, I'm losing, right? And and sometimes that's the case. If you're talking about, if you're in a conflict over who gets how you're going to split the $100, it's a zero-sum game, right? If someone gets more, the other person gets less. But in a lot of conflicts, we're not talking about zero-sum situations. We have to look at, kind of a third possible solution. And the way that we do that primarily for example, when I'm mediating, I try to shift people away from what's called positional arguments or positional negotiation, which is, I guess, so here's the example that I was given that I think works out really well. Israel and Egypt were involved in the 7 Days War. And Israel just stomped all over and took a chunk of Israel. They captured the territory. And they were going in for a negotiation at the end as to how do we solve this? What are the peace terms going to be? And the zero-sum negotiation is, well, I have this land and you want it. So one of us has to give up some of that land if we're going to settle. The third way that they ended up coming up with was by identifying their needs, their values, what was important to them. Israel needed to feel safe. They needed to make sure that they had a buffer between the center of their country and their enemy. Egypt would like their territory back. So the third way that they got there was they said, fine, in order for Israel to feel safe, we will say that this is a demilitarized zone. There will be no troops, no military that moves into this space. You can keep the land, we'll give you the land back, but you can't put your army there. That meets everybody's needs. We try to find solutions that will work for everyone, that everyone can live with. And the way we do that is by identifying what's important. Why, what's the source of the conflict? And does it have to be zero-sum, or can we find other ways?
Mm-hmm. Ormar, we talked a little bit, we've only got a few more moments left, but we talked about online very quickly, and I can't encourage it enough. There's a number of ECM articles, I believe Randall wrote one on Facebook better, if I remember right, but I can't encourage viewers, listeners, readers, who knows what the format of this will be, but I encourage you to check that out. But I want to get back to face-to-face real quickly. You're an officer, you're just an informal leader, whatever, but you come upon a scenario that may need a little bit of de-escalation. What are some thoughts that come to your mind as a leader, some options you can take?
Even if you're not a leader, bystander intervention as a whole can definitely play into the de-escalation process. Delaying exactly maybe what's kind of causing the conflict in the first place by either changing the subject, just taking a pause and being like, hey, let's just kind of take a break from the conversation and talk about other things. rehumanize the individual that you're talking with, or that between the two individuals that are having a conflict, rehumanize the thing. Find the thing that you find common ground on that kind of makes you like, oh, right, yeah, no, we are friends. We're just having a discussion right now. Let's take a couple steps back. Reminding people that, you know, the individual you're talking to isn't your enemy. They're not trying to attack you. You're just having a discussion. So some of those delaying tactics, those distraction tactics definitely help in those situations. Sometimes, like she kind of pointed out, giving people space. And that can be through time and through actual physical distance between people. And sometimes just, leaving the situation is probably best. Splitting people up sometimes is best for that situation. So I think being mindful of kind of where the conflict is at, how far along it is, and exactly how to, like, should we just delay the conversation? Should we walk away from the conversation? Should we split it up entirely? Like, those are things to consider and kind of be mindful of how far along is it? Does everybody just need a breather? Does everybody just need a joke thrown in there to kind of feel a little bit more like, oh, right, yeah, no, we're still human beings, we're having fun. Because ultimately, like, whether it's in real world or Amtgard, we're all here to try to have fun and enjoy our lives. So understanding that everybody probably wants what's best for whatever their situation is, be it that conversation or in general, they want whatever's best for them. And sometimes that's just having a great time.
I really did have to draw this into a close, but we're up against a bookend with another panel. Please just do me a favor. We'll start all the way down on the right-hand side with you, Azrael-Jade. Any foot stops, we're going to let this go until you've said what needs to be said. The next panel are really nice people. We'll deal with that conflict when it happens. But no, this is a recurring request. So, and I never appreciated the scope of really where this conversation could go. So I really want to make sure that we get in those last key points and those thoughts down there for the viewership. So again, starting with you, Azrael-Jade, a couple moments of what are some key things you hope that everybody either took away from it, or maybe needs to do some more research or some new thoughts as they continue on this kind of topic?
I think when you're communicating with people, the biggest thing to remember is the person you're communicating with, either a person or across the internet, across the country, we're all human, and kind of treat each other how you would want to be treated, and try to be nice. One thing we didn't touch on, I want to touch on real quick, is when you're doing communication online, when those verbal cues are not there, it can't hurt when you're having a conversation with somebody to say, what you're saying is making me angry. They can't see your red face, they can't see your clenched fists, or what you're saying is making me sad, or this hurts my feelings, because they're not there to see that. So that could also be part of your online communication, is to verbalize what you're feeling about what they're saying. But just trying to come together. Remember that we're all human. Conflict is inevitable. We just have to figure out how to reach resolution. And I think that's kind of like a personal thing, how we all each reach resolution with the people around us. And just be kind to each other at the end of the day.
That was a lot of what I had. It's really just remembering that the person you're fighting with is also a person who is the hero of their story. So if you can, like Ormar was saying, if you can reduce your discussion to like a base component that everyone can agree on. Okay, so we all know this is true and needs to happen. If you can agree on one thing at the foundation, it makes it a lot easier to figure out what steps need to be taken next to resolve a conflict, because you're starting from common ground. It puts you on the same side instead of this like me and my enemy dichotomy. So that helped me.
Be aware and mindful as possible where your perspective is, your reactions are, and that of the other person, and try to connect those two. And again, it's as simple as y'all have been saying before, is, I feel da da da, or I don't like da da da. So the person may not even realize what's bothering you, and vice versa. Or if you're not sure what's bothering the other person, help me understand. You seemed upset. What's bothering you? Just to be aware of both sides. And doesn't even have to be two opposing sides.
I'm going to stomp empathy. I mean, that's kind of what everybody has been saying, but you need to realize that you do come across occasionally, narcissists or sociopaths, people who don't actually care about other human beings. But the vast majority of people that you are going to interact with, the positions that they're taking, the things that they are saying, very few people are just awful human beings. And when you deal with people in Amtgard, just because you're having conflict with someone, it's key to remember, A, that they're human, and B, generally in the Amtgard sense, they're trying to make things better. They're not trying to ruin things. They're not trying to be awful or mean or nasty. Now, there are those people, but in general, it's not there. So in most cases, we all want to have things go well. We all want the game to get better. We all want the project to get completed. We all want the event to happen this way. We all want, everybody to have fun. Most conflict comes from people having different visions about how they get there, at least in Amtgard specifically. And remembering that they are not evil, nasty, horrible human beings, but they are people who are genuinely trying to do the best that they can. And I'm going to add one last little piece, which is, please also remember that conflict doesn't have to be bad. Conflict and competition are are the ways that we push each other, we challenge each other, we get people to succeed. Now, sometimes that gets nasty, and that's what we want to avoid. But people having different visions is okay. People disagreeing is okay. You're allowed to have different opinions, and you're allowed to discuss them. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and good can come out of it. But you do have to remember that you're dealing with people who are pretty much just like you.
I actually really like your last line, that you're dealing with people who are just like you. Realize when you're going into those conversations, as we said at the start, conflict is inevitable. It's part of communication. That's kind of at the core of what communication is. Everybody has different expectations or interpretations of what they feel should be the right way. And communication and conflict is you kind of discussing what the differences are between those expectations and coming to a decision on what the whole group's expectation is. So conflict will happen. Another thing too to keep in mind is you're an individual too who might cause some of that conflict. Give yourself checks and balances. If you start not really keeping checks on where you're at, whether you're upset or being mindful of what you're saying, perhaps you pushed to a point of where you're kind of stressed a little bit. Give yourself some time to kind of reconsider everything that you're saying and doing, so that way you don't become the catalyst for conflict that's unnecessary. So it's inevitable. Give yourself some time, give yourself some breathing room, and still say what you want to say. Communicate.
And I have one last thing. I'm sorry it just popped into my head, but it's something that is really important in communication. You need to have in your head the ability to recognize that you might be the one who's wrong on the internet. You're not always right. Sometimes you're wrong. And there's a lot of power in terms of communication from when you recognize oh crap, I'm the wrong one. Saying, oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Those two words make communication able to continue. And if you can acknowledge that you made a mistake and apologize for it, that is one of the most powerful things you can do in terms of being able to have ongoing communication. It's acknowledging that you made a mistake or you were wrong.
Great. Well, I sure appreciate your time today. Again, a very broad topic. We could have spent probably, there's been years and years and decades and generations of study on this, right? So thank you all for giving some of your time and your pen and sharing your words of wisdom with us. If I could, a round of applause for our panel. A big round of applause for the amazing support team that we've got running around here. All right, and thanks everybody again. Enjoy the rest of your event.